So today I'm going to be talking with Professor Margaret Carran. Margaret is associate professor in law and associate dean of education in City University of London. She is a well-experienced lawyer in the gaming law or gambling law, and it is a great opportunity to have you here today and to have a little discussion with you. So welcome, Margaret.
Thank you very much.
Please correct me if I have said anything which is not 100% correct according to your title. So you have a lot of experience with the gambling law. Can you tell me a little bit more about your journey of how did you become a gambling lawyer, and this being your career path?
No problem. I just to make some technical corrections to the introduction, I'm actually an associate professor as opposed to a full professor. It's usually not a huge distinction, but just for accuracy purposes. And you're referring to me as a lawyer. I consider myself more to be an academic rather than a lawyer. And that's primarily because quite a lot of people, when you refer to lawyers, they instantly think of someone who is practicing law, whereas I teach law, which is the same field, but slightly different discipline. And I do have a lot of expertise in the gambling law, but from an academic perspective, not from a perspective of a lawyer who is, for example, advising companies on specific rules and regulations or dealing with disputes. So my expertise in the gambling law is very much based on my research and on my teaching gambling law and regulations of online entertainment and regulations of variety of gambling-related activities online. How I got into this field, I was an academic already at the time, and my field of expertise was very different. My field was essentially into what we call in England the foundation of legal knowledge. I teach equity and trust, but I needed to think of a particular topic that I could do my PhD on. And I'm always very heavily involved in commercial law. So I did arbitration, I did international trade. But I really wanted to do my PhD in an area where I could make a really proper original contribution to the field rather than just do a synthesis of what is available and not being able to make too much of an original research. And at the time where I was looking for my title or my topic, England was going through a major change. And it was particularly crucial in terms of it was a total shift in how gambling was perceived. So before the Gambling Act 2005, England had the view that gambling is a vice that needs to be regulated and controlled, but only needs to be offered to the extent that there is a demand, and demand should not be stimulated. And after the act, there was a major shift towards thinking that actually gambling is no longer a vice per se, but it's a normal commercial activity that can be stimulated. So that was quite a major change. And also, of course, at the time, the online gambling became significantly more prevalent. It was still early days, but the regulations was from pre-internet era. So as you can imagine, it was completely out of date and really needed to be updated. So that's kind of felt like a really an interesting area when you can capture a transitions from one environment, a prohibited, negative to some extent, into another environment that it's positive, especially with regards to children and minors, because they were the ones who've seen the transitions at the time where they are very impressionistic and actually it impacts them significantly. So my PhD was on regulation of gambling and how the regulations can or should protect minors and other vulnerable people from gambling-related harm. And one of the very interesting aspects and unique aspects, because this can no longer be repeated unless there is another major shift in legislation.
Yes.
And even then, it wouldn't be possible, was my ability to capture the views of a substantial group of minors who lived through the transition, who have seen how the high street looked like before the liberalization of gambling, where it was kind of treated in a, pushed down the high street at the back end of it and looked like a place where most people don't necessarily want to go into an environment when you have plenty of betting shops and gambling shops on the high street, and they don't look unappealing. They look attractive. They look like cafe places. So that's how it started. And since then, I've done quite a lot of different kinds of research. I've wrote different kinds of articles on gambling related stuff.
Yes. Thank you for the very comprehensive answer. I wanted to ask about the more recent work that you did, because obviously now we work together on the project of the Self-Exclusion Standards. I wanted to basically create an introduction to it through your recent work with the European Betting and Gaming Council, in which you are looking into different European states, and how I understand it, your aim was to look into the level of harmonization or standardization of the procedures and the laws in individual countries. So can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yes, that was the work that I've done with the European Gaming and Betting Association. And we've done two pieces of work, actually three, but one was an initial piece of work and then an updated version, and the other one was separate. So the first piece of work was really to find out how European member states regulate online gambling, especially in light of the European Commission recommendation that kind of wanted to nudge jurisdictions towards more harmonized approach. So we wanted to find out not only the broad parameters of how gambling is regulated, but actually drill down a little bit to details. So we looked at how regulations operate with regards to players' identification, the know your customer requirements, protection of minors, social responsibility measures, advertising, also referrals to services for those who, for example, self-exclude or have been identified as having a problem with their gambling, and try to see what are the similarities between the different jurisdictions and what are the differences. And that was first done in 2019, and then it was updated in 2021, 2022. The second part of the project was looking at European member states and how they measure problem gambling within the jurisdictions, so how they measure gambling engagement, but also how they measure problem gamblings. And again, to see if we can identify any similarities between the methods of measurements, primarily because if you can find similarities between method of measurements, then you have a better tool to compare different effectiveness of different rules in different jurisdictions. And we essentially compiled all the report that highlights all the participating member states and what they do in this respect.
Okay. Moving to the project on the self-exclusion standards, it is an ongoing work currently, which goal is to create a set of recommendations on what the best practice for self-exclusion should be internationally. The project is divided into some different into different stages or phases. Could you describe the project to the audience a little bit? Because actually it is your doing. You are the one who has created and drafted it, and basically the whole group and everyone involved is following the path.
Well, I've done the methodology. I've devised the methodology for the project. I wouldn't be able to do the project myself. I think it would defeat the whole concept of what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve. Because you are absolutely correct when you said that what we're trying to achieve is to create best practice guidelines. That's what we're trying to do. But we're not trying to just come up with some random recommendations that just comes from some academic research. We actually want to to analyze the existing evidence that is already there and bring a very important variety in expertise when we can almost dissect what currently is happening in order to identify what the proper standards should be. But methodology in any of the project is particularly important because the ultimate aim is not for us to produce a piece of paper with nice recommendations that no one looks at. We actually want to produce a set of recommendations that people will take seriously. And not only people will take seriously, but will actually take a proper serious considerations as to whether they can implement it either as complementary to their existing regulations within the countries that have regulatory framework already well established, or to nudge those places where the regulations may be at its infancy or perhaps no regulations at all, to see how the operators can increase the protections of the players and the protections of their business in the same manner by adopting those standards. So it's important that the methodology is rigorous, robust, and actually shows that we are not looking at specific cultural point of view only. We're trying to be international in nature. So we have on the group representations from 3 continents. We have representations from Europe. We have representations from Africa. We have representations from North America. And it's really quite fascinating how even countries that seemingly are similar bring a different perspective to the discussions. But that also makes us more conscious that any recommendations that we're trying to provide should hopefully have the appeal and resonate with many different jurisdictions as opposed to a particular one if it is confined to just one. So that's why the methodology was critical. And how it is essentially we've done a very comprehensive literature review of the existing literature and the evidence that is available on what self-exclusion standards are actually at the moment imposed by different jurisdictions. We also did a snapshot of 5 jurisdictions to see what the specific regulatory requirements are. The second phase that we are currently on is a task and finish project working group that essentially discusses every single minute detail and every single component of the self-exclusion schemes in order to shift through it and identify what best of those really are. And the final stage will essentially be after we do the draft set of recommendations. It would be to try to have as wide as possible consultations with regulators, policymakers, industry members, treatment providers and others to then refine and potentially amend those with the view of publications and hopeful implementation.
Yeah. So to sum it up, we have 3 stages. First, with the research and fact-finding. The second, the remote and in-person meetings of the work group, consisting from 11 individuals with diverse experience and expertise, including 3 continents, as you've said.
And all different stakeholders. I think it's important. Indeed. It's not just international in nature, but we actually have representations from academia, that's me, but we have representations from industry, that's you. We have representations from treatment providers for people who have experience with sustainability and regulators. We have legal expertise as well. We have those who have suffered from problem gambling themselves. And we have members of the public that kind of contributes a different perspective and different angle onto the discussion. So we actually have representations from every single stakeholder group that is out there. And not just the obvious stakeholders, but also the ones that are often ignored, like the general public. And I think that is quite important to emphasize because too much of research or papers or recommendations sometimes come from one-sided view. Either industry produces something that they consider it to be the guide, or the academics produce something that is very theoretical and very well researched, but not necessarily fully considers the practical implications of the recommendations. What we're trying to do is to bring all those things together. And kind of make recommendations that are in fact feasible and would work in practice.
To embrace that robust methodology that was in plan from the beginning. Yes, and then concluding with the third phase on the broader consultations, basically getting the feedback from the stakeholders around the industry.
And much wider number of them, because that would hopefully, it's significantly less time commitment to look through a relatively brief paper and make comments than it would be to commit to a project that it's quite a long and time consuming.
Can you explain the importance of having consistent self-exclusion practice across different jurisdictions and gaming platforms?
Can you explain, or are you asking me to explain?
I'm asking you.
Because you said, can I explain? Okay, that's fine.
Did I say that?
I think so.
I'm sorry. I would like you to explain.
That's all right. In terms of, I'm generally a strong fan of harmonizations. Not on everything, and I'm not making it as a generic comment. Harmonize everything, absolutely not. But there are certain things which I think really would benefit from harmonizations, and I personally think that gambling regulations would really benefit from harmonizations, primarily from the point of view of players' protections. One of the main benefits of having consistent rules is that if you apply the same rules and the same standards across different jurisdictions, you're actually getting much better evidence of the robustness of the tool, how it actually works. And I appreciate that there have to be certain cultural differences and certain adjustment in different jurisdictions, because it has to take account the realities of the player's experience in any given country. It has to take account of the cultural and expectation differences that exist. But broadly, most of the things that relate to gambling, we're not that different as human beings, regardless of where we are from, regardless of the culture is. And having the consistency helps with a proper evidence base that helps with evaluations and actually being able to determine what really works, what really is effective, and what has the proper impact in order to protect the players in the way that we want, which means that we want to have as little issues with gambling as possible. And most people are able to gamble safely. We want everybody to be able to enjoy gambling without suffering any harmful consequences. The other advantage of kind of global standards and having consistent rules is that it also helps with education and awareness raising, because when everyone is exposed to the same principles, then people will get used to it. Players will get used to it. Yeah. They will know that no matter where they go, that's what they can expect. If something doesn't go quite right, they know where to look for information and look for help. If you have lots of different rules, as is currently the case, even such basic things as the location of information about self-exclusion, for example, in some places, players may spend quite a bit of time looking for it. In other places, it may be much easier to find, but it's not necessarily intuitive or something that people instantly know.
Yes.
If we have consistent standards, it will be easy. They will know no matter on which side they are, which would help the players, but it would also help the operators. It also would hopefully minimize any desire of people to play on unregulated gambling sites, because those are likely to ignore any recommendations or social responsibilities. And at the moment, it's very difficult for a player to know if a provider is following the rules or the regulations that they are required. The regulators, the commissions, the controllers, they would know. But players wouldn't necessarily know. If you have consistent rules and something is different, they know instantly, and they can avoid those websites because they may not want to take unnecessary risk in that respect. So overall, all those things have a huge, even if only subtle, benefit that don't just benefit the players, but also benefit the operators, and in turn benefits the regulators, because it's much easier to control things when they are the same across jurisdictions than it is the case when they are everywhere different.
And then also compare it one another. So there is a great potential in this area, and it is also visible on other projects from different areas which are focused on standardization and harmonization. What do you consider, or what do you say are the key challenges in our work towards the self-exclusion standards?
I think the challenges are also the great opportunities, but I think the sheer volume of the scope of the project. And if you think about it, you may think, oh, self-exclusion is so easy because most of the parameters are already quite well established. But when you actually drill into the details, and then we already had quite a few meetings, every single, even no matter how tiny, generates really rich and very insightful discussions and so many different implications of any choice that it's being made. It differs if you are choosing it for what kind of players you're choosing it. It may differ if we're only looking at self-exclusion as a harm minimization tool or whether we are doing it as for different purposes. So actually, the biggest challenge is to go through all those details and come back with a balanced set of recommendations that will be sufficiently extensive in scope to be meaningful, but not so detailed as to become impossible to implement in practice.
Yeah. I have one last question, and that would be about how do you envision the adaptation and implementation of these standards on a global scale?
That's a difficult one because we have so many different jurisdictions with so many different regulations. So I hope that this will be a complementary in jurisdictions that already have a regulatory framework. So it could not and would not in any ways be capable of replacing any existing regulations, but hopefully it would be taken into account by the regulators and policymakers when they're thinking about the requirements they impose on the industry and what they expect from players and the educational bits within their individual countries. In those places where the regulation is perhaps less advanced or in some places not fully existent, I hope that it will actually nudge those places to implement more formal regulatory requirements and in many ways help them to have
It's just a little fly.
Help them to adopt to adopt something that hopefully will be considered as a good set of recommendations that could be easily translated into different languages and different cultures. So kind of having a two-edged sword that looking at helping regulators in various countries see what they can and should do with it, but also the gambling operators. We hope that they will see that that will be beneficial, not just for the players, because that goes without saying, but also for their businesses. They want to be sustainable. They want to remain sustainable. They want to ensure that their customers are playing happily and do not suffer any harm as a result of engagement with their activity. So hopefully those standards will help in one way. There are plenty of others towards making sure that it's a sustainable industry that actually takes the social responsibility and the protection customers properly seriously.
Before I will say goodbye, I would like to make one last point and to put us somewhere in time. So we are currently in the second stage of the work group's meeting. So what is the most recent step that the project is going to take? What awaits for us most recently? Perhaps when is the time when we would be able to see some outcomes or something which can be publicly basically communicated?
There's still some time to go. We are still in the second phase, so the recommendations are only just starting to get shape and being devised. They are not yet even in a draft form. And before they go into like a formal domain as the final documentations, we of course have the third stage, which tends to be the longest one. And that is the consultation. But it's a very critical stage in a sense that we don't want we don't want to recommend something that was not consulted upon, because while we have representatives from all stakeholders and we have an incredible expertise on the team, it's remarkable how many really excellent people are happy to contribute to this project from many different countries. We are only 11. And that, of course, cannot replace the wider contributions of other stakeholders who may have a very different take and may bring up comments that we haven't thought of. So at least the preliminary things, I'm hoping that we should have something ready around September 2024. But that is assuming that the consultations will attract responses. It is perfectly possible that the consultations may take even longer, but I hope it's not going to take longer for the final documents to be ready for January 2025 at the very latest.
Yeah, definitely. Then working on the impact of the project would be very important, which is also one of the areas of my focus. Thank you very much, Margaret. It was a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you a little bit more about the project and to create an overview of what we're doing and what is important around it. So thank you for having the time with me.
Thank you for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to explain more about the project myself.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.